Hello and welcome to Rest and Review. This is a super powerful part of the program, and we're just going to kind of go back, mine all the gold that we got from this week, and it helps really get that non-physical, non-linear nature of ourselves and help reap some of the deeper rewards that we're building here. So we're going to go back. So we'll go back to day one. So day one is where we did safe to be safe for mom and dad. So we want to just go back, think about what you got that day. When you're doing those clearings, like how did it feel in your body? How did it feel with mom? How did it feel with dad? The nuances, the difference between the two. But then also, what happened those next 4 to 12 hours? Because we let it go, we kicked off the warp gate, but now we're going to look back. Okay, what happened in those 4 to 12 hours? Did you need to slow it down? Did you feel like, oh, it got a little intense and you remembered to slow it down? Or maybe it just got intense and you forgot that, hey, wait, maybe it's that warp gate that was causing that. So we're just going to look back. We're just going to go back to that day of like, okay, what happened that day? You know, because we stalled the warp gate. We kicked it off for mom and dad. But what happened those 4 to 12 hours after? You know, some new realizations come in, because we want to start building that conscious mind link of like, you're kicking off these warp gates, your unconscious is doing a lot of energy work and you're starting to get the results back, right? You start seeing like, hey, wait a second, I started doing things differently. Maybe there's new things that opened up, even on that first day of like, I hadn't been doing XYZ for a while. So we're just going back and mining of like, what happened on, day one. So doing that, you can pause the video if you need to. We're just going to, it's a little review of like, because there's also, you've gotten 5 more or 6 more days of clearings since then. So you've got like new awarenesses that when you go back, your unconscious was recording everything was there, and you might be able to see things anew. Now looking back of like, hey, wait a second, I got some more realizations that I didn't realize that I got. So this is the other magic of it, of like, now that you're opened more of this with your unconscious mind, you're actually gonna be able to go back and see more than you saw on the day that it happened, which it gets really kind of nutty, but it's awesome. All right, so day 2, we did safe to be safe, and that was on the mother's side to your grandparents. So kind of, how was that? How was it going to grandma? How was it going to grandpa? Like, what was the difference? How did the energy flow differently? What do you notice now looking back of like, hey, wait a second, this was occurring. I didn't notice that was occurring. And then also that 4 to 12 hours after, did you need to slow those down? How was that compared to mom and dad looking back of like, okay, what happened that day? And did you remember to slow it down if it got a little intense? Or like, oh man, it was a really intense day. Hey, could that have been the clearings? Could that have been all that was letting go of? And kind of we're building that connection, that bond of like, oh, wait a second, when I'm kicking off these warp gates, there could be a lot that's leaving, and maybe I was holding on to it. Maybe I was like, being like, oh, this is up, that is up, and then like, wait a second, maybe that was releasing. And now you're going to get that conscious awareness of like, oh, that's what was going on. Right? And we also talked a little bit of like, what to pay attention to, like, okay, hey, what's happening? What am I going to pay attention to after I do the clearings? So there's a little bit of that. And then day 3, we did safe to be safe, but on the father's side. So your grandparents on your father's side. And what was that like? Also notice, was there apprehension going into it? Was there apprehension going in the day before of like, was it felt like something was building? And then what happened when you did, kicked off the warp gates? What was that like compared to the previous days? Was it more intense or less intense? Or like, what was the differences? Notice that there was nuances that you're kicking off warp gates and you're feeling the energetic changes, that you're feeling, hey, I'm noticing something. And that's only a fraction of what's going on. And then look, 4 to 12 hours after that, what was happening then? Like, because we were letting it go, right? But then now look back, like, hey, what happened those 4 to 12 hours? Wow, did I have any epiphanies? Or no, it's like, did I have epiphanies? Did I start doing stuff that I hadn't been doing before? Or even just noticing like, hey, I felt that like not feeling safe. Like that started cracking open. It's always been there. It's always been running. But now instead of running unconsciously, maybe it came up to your conscious mind where you're like, hey, wait a second. I do have some sense of not feeling safe. And maybe started connecting up of like, wow, I haven't been taking action in these various areas because this has been running underneath. Those are some of the realizations that might have been coming up. So it could have been either way of like, wow, I'm just feeling more safe, or it might be consciously feeling that not safe feeling. right? But now it's conscious. Now you can restart working on it and be like, hey, wait, that was running, right? And all these clearings, all these kicking these warp gates are going to massively clear that out. So that was day 3. We also did a little bit of self-care, realizing that you're doing a ton of energy work and that, you need to, take care of yourself, because this is your unconscious mind doing energy work at warp speed. So there's a lot going on. And then day 4 was kind of a switch up, because that's when we started talking about the siblings, right? And then also if you were only child, running that one. So it's kind of like, what was that like? Because it's a little different than, your parents and your grandparents and kind of like that lineage going back versus someone that you might have more associated that was kind of going through the more present time stuff that you were going through. So you'd still kind of connect and energetically change from that perspective versus like kind of something that's passed down to you. So like, what was that experience? What did that feel like? Did you feel it more? Did you feel it less? And then what happened those 4 to 12 hours? Did you slow down the warp gates if you needed to? If it got pretty intense, it could have been stuff just leaving. Were you holding on to it, or was it letting it go? Right? So that's what we did. And that was also a little more dynamic, because you could have more than one brother, more than one sister, and you could also run it to people that weren't necessarily a biological sister, but were someone that was like a sister to you or like a brother to you. So I kind of had you had a little more play on that of like, oh, let's play with that a little bit, right? And you can always go back and do some more on that. Then also just the other one, if you happen to be an only child, of like that switch up of like what the dynamic of being an only child. And maybe you just said, hey, I wasn't an only child, but I tried it anyway, and whoa, I felt this. That's something you can do. You also got that in day 6, but we're not there yet. So then on day 5 was a big day. That's where we were doing the self-referencing energetic chains and non-biological parents, safe to be safe, which was huge. Depending on your involvement with a non-biological parent or someone that was acting like a parent, or a step parent, that's a whole dynamic. We want to incorporate that dynamic. What was that like? What happened when we do those clearings? Was it more powerful than you expected? Was there a greater attachment there or less of attachment? And it could be just like, it could have been so intense that it had to be run slower. But now looking back of like, hey, wait, what really happened? What happened that day? Are you gleaning more information? Because it's huge, it's a big one. The non-biological parents still really huge. And then obviously the self-referencing chains, because that's the layer we put on top of everything. We do all this chain, we all hook it, and then we're like, okay, what does that all mean to me? How am I gonna frame myself to make sure all of those get followed? Because you're dealing with another person. They could drop a chain, they could change things up, but when you chain it to yourself, you're like, okay, I can control this now. Even if they drop that chain, I'm staying chained, right? Obviously we want to let those go, but yeah, so we cleared self-referencing chains, safe to be safe. So it's a huge day. So what was that like? Going back, did we slow it down? Or was there like, did our mind get really noodly and be like, whoa, what is going on? Am I this? Who am I this? What's my identity? Like, did any of that occur? And realizing like, we're letting that go. Those are all the preconceived notions of like, you have to be this way versus your beingness. Like your beingness has got you. God has got you. Like you are good, right? It's just these rules that are whacked, and we're clearing them out at a really fast pace. So just notice what happened that day, because we're building that connection with our unconscious, saying like, hey, I'm noticing what's going on. I can handle it. This part's a little intense, because your unconscious knows which part's intense and knows most likely how you're gonna respond, but it wants that feedback. I want you to have that connection where you're like, yeah, I'm willing to go forward, right? Versus being like, I want to go forward, and knows you don't. It's gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna listen to I don't want it, right? Versus you just realizing, and it's okay to look back and say, oh wow, I was totally in resistance. But by you looking back, seeing yourself in resistance and being like, I don't want to be in resistance, is letting that go. It's like giving that go signal to your unconscious of like, oh yeah, I'm ready to rock and roll. So day 5, huge. Self-referencing energetic change is intense. So another great day. What happened? Pause the video if you need to, but like just get that down. Capture some of the magic that happened that day that possibly you didn't see. So we jump into day 6. That's when we did the meditation. So if you need to pause, get your day 5. But day 6 is where we did the meditation and walked through each one of the clearings, kind of stacking them all on top of each other in a single day, and you got the only child clearings if you didn't do the only child, and vice versa if you did the only child and then you got the sibling clearings. And like, what was that experience of like, hey, wait, because you know, in previous lifetimes you would have been a sibling, you would have had brothers and sisters, or you would have been an only child, or even in this lifetime, if everything was placed on you of like, you're the one that's going to move things forward and the other siblings were discounted, and then that could always switch. So it just clears a whole bunch of stuff related to siblings or being an only child. But notice what happened on that meditation day. So it wasn't so much actively you going through doing the clearings, but you had already experienced those, and then they all got stacked on top of each other. And did you get all the way through it? Or did you slow it down or stop and be like, hey, whoa, this is intense? Because it was very intense. There's a lot of warp gates getting kicked off. So it's like, did you slow it down? And then also that 4 to 12 hours or longer, because there's so many and you might have slowed them down, which would have extended that 12 hours a bit. What was that? What happened in those? Did you need to slow it down more throughout the day? So what happened? Or did a whole bunch more clear, a whole bunch like realizations come through of like, almost like, because like a resumming of the week, of redoing the week, redoing those clearings on a deeper level. What was day 6 like? What was that meditation day? You know, we're just going back, we're just mining that, kind of seeing that, like, were there new realizations that opened up now looking back and comparing that of like, now you're day 7. You know, we're not going to kick off more warp gates unless you really want to, but this is kind of like, we also wanted to have that where you realize that all these warp gates were kicking off and you kind of saw like kind of the interplay of this safety that was happening. It was more like rules that you had to follow that are starting to get unwound, and kind of get that thing of like, it's not like you have to do a warp gate all the time, or if you notice it, that you have to do it like as if there's something broken with you. And that could have been in the past of like this, like kind of like broken, gotta fix it, versus starting to see of like, wait a second, there's just a lot of rules that I was kind of getting pushed to do. And that's why my results weren't the way I wanted them to be. Or that's why things are kind of all higgledy-piggledy and it looks like a failing of you or a failing of your beingness, when it's really just a lot of bad rules that like make it to where you can't win. Right? So maybe we're starting to get that realization of like, wait a second, that me part of me, that beingness of me, there's nothing wrong with it. So that's kind of what this rest and review is also about. One, to start getting a better, closer, like, you know, understanding of that and like experience of that. But then also realizing we don't have to, you could see like, oh man, I did get that realization. Oh, I want to run that warp gate again. I want to run that. But possibly like, but I can wait a day, because my being's not broken. It's just I got some bad rules to follow. But if you really want to just run them, you can run them. But also notice that you can take the pause, take the break, realizing it's not a brokenness in you, it's just some bad rules that you're removing. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of that realization too. And that's partly why this rest and review is so important, because you can just get into that, like, you know, I just got to clear it, I got to clear it, I got to clear it, versus realizing there's nothing wrong with you. You're being a light. We're just changing some of the rules you got to play by. Clear up some of those rules to where the more of you, the true part of you, can come out. So hopefully you liked the rest and review. It was pretty active. It probably was a lot of learning, a lot of intensity to that, even though it was a rest and review, of realizing, wow, there's so much more that I was able to glean from my week that I maybe wasn't in perspective to. I wasn't able to like perceive, but now after running the warp gates, I could. And just hopefully kind of hook up that connection of like, wow, if I continue to do warp gates, how much more is my perspective going to widen? How much more am I going to be able to be aware of? How much more of me is going to be able to come out? So hopefully you're getting that. It's kicking in. You did an amazing amount of energy work, and it's really important to go back and do this review. So congratulations, you're here. You did the review as well. And like I like to say, until we talk again, have a blessed day or a blessed night.